All right, we can go ahead and get started. I dropped a message in our chat to remind folks that we're hanging out today. But we can go ahead and get started. This also live streams over our YouTube channel, so there are folks that are watching from there as well. But I'd like to welcome everybody to Bring a Hacker to Work Day. Our guest today is Prateek. Am I pronouncing that right?
Yep, that's correct.
And he is from, I think it's Security Risk Advisors. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
And he's a purple teamer. So, do you want to tell us a little bit about what you do and what does it look like for you day to day?
Yeah, sure. So just like a little bit of history, I started at SRA on what we used to call our AppSec team, which was like a white box testing team, right? We do like code review, infrastructure analysis, that kind of stuff. Um, and we were doing that for quite a while. And as that form of business, we weren't doing as much of it. So I moved into standard pen testing and red teaming, and I wasn't liking that as much, so I started to ask to move to doing a little bit more blue team work, defensive writing, defensive capabilities, and um, coming up with ways to like alert on activities that were happening. Around that time, the EDR space was also exploding, right? So that's when CrowdStrike had come out and Windows Defender was starting to become the product it is today. So there was a huge shift in this sort of deep system inspection version of security that was coming out. And that basically around that time, purple teaming was becoming a thing. So at SRA, I helped develop some of our earliest iterations of purple teams. I ran some of the earliest versions of purple teams, and about 4 or 5 years ago, when I was talking with my boss about what I would be doing next at SRA, one of the things we had come up with was how can we use purple teams to drive defensive measures, right? So for anyone who's not aware, purple teaming is um, every organization does it slightly differently. I'll just sort of explain how we do it at SRA. It's basically the defensive folks, the blue team, and the offensive folks, the red team. They basically sit down together on a Zoom call like this, or we've even done it around a table, right? The client gives us a sacrificial piece of hardware that they have their stack on, and we just attack it in front of them. And we don't just like go full throttle. What we do is we have a list of things what we want to run, right? We want to run this type of exploit. We want to move laterally in this way. We want to get credentials in this way. And we have that all recorded, and we record the start and stop as we do them. And then the job of the defensive team is to tell us what happened, right? Did the attack get blocked? If it didn't get blocked, did they get an alert for it? If they didn't even get alerted for it, did they at least, did the tool set see it at all? Or was there nothing, right? That's happened quite a few times where actually we didn't see it at all. Um, and we record all these outcomes. As we run through this, we record the outcomes and we say, okay, cool, here's how well you did. Of course, this is nice from a report card perspective, but we took a lot of effort to say, how can we use purple teaming to drive the defensive capabilities of an organization? And one side effect of purple teaming that we found is that it put the malicious behavior in the tool sets, right? Like, if you don't know what, and I'm just going to throw Mimikatz out here, or actually, you know what? I'm going to use Kerberos as a better example. If you don't know what Kerberos looks like, writing a rule or tuning a rule for Kerberos is really, really difficult, right? And if you don't know what Kerberos is, I'll make that homework for anyone listening. So like it's hard to write a rule for that. It's hard to tune a rule for that, right? Because you just don't know what to expect. So the side effect of purple teaming was all of a sudden it put these malicious signals into the tool set. All of a sudden you can say at 2 o'clock on July 17th, we ran Kerberos. I can go into my logs and see exactly what that looks like when the attacker runs Kerberos, and now I have data to write rules with. So we started using this capability to drive our the defensive side more. So instead of just running a massive purple team once a year, we said let's pare that all the way down. Now we're going to run something that we can do in one single day. It's not a lot of test cases, but the goal is that we run it over and over again, so that we can write a rule. Next time we run it, did it work? Yes, no. Either way, let's tune that rule a little bit. Let's run it again next quarter. And we did that over and over again with the idea that then over the course of a year, you could see how your security posture improved from January to December. And that program, what we call our Purple Team Essentials program, is the one that we worked on. And obviously I like it because I helped develop it. Um, uh, the thing that we really ended up, we found that people responded to, though, is that we gave them a strategy to do defensive engineering, right? To do content development. There's a way for now a defender to say, I know what I'm, writing my rules for. And that gave us a way for people to move forward, right? Like it gave them a good rubric, if you will, to develop to the next step.
So let me get this straight. Like I am still stuck like 3 minutes ago when you said that you guys are all sitting at a table with the client stack, and you're like basically hacking like live, like
Yeah,
in front of them. And then, I guess the defensive people are there to see if whether or not they can actually
exactly. Yeah.
see what it is that's going on. Do they have like a playbook ahead of time that says, hey, these are the types of attacks we're going to be running, or these are, this is what we're going to be doing? Or is it, are you just sitting there like freestyling?
So everything is decided ahead of time. Now, each client is a little bit different in how they let their like specific analysts see what the test cases will be like way ahead of time. But at the beginning of the day, every single person will know what we're going to be running that day. And this is true even for our longer assessments, like our 1 or 2 week assessments. So like, on Monday we're going to be doing this, on Tuesday we're going to be doing this. But even in our single day assessments, we'll say, all right, this morning, like in the morning, we'll have a stand up and we'll say, today we're going to run these 50 attacks in your environment. So we ask for a box, right? And now some of this is obviously simulated, right? So we're not like going out there searching for vulnerable servers, right? We're going to say, like, we're not trying to fish a user. We're going to say, assume, I, Prateek, have been phished and I've downloaded this document and I've opened it, right? Like, so you always assume, and I hate to say this, but you always assume the user is going to make the worst possible decision, right? And I think that's a fair assumption to make because the user's trying to get work done, right? So for them, they're just sitting there saying all these checkboxes, it's not my responsibility to understand, it's the security team's responsibility. So like if it's a macro-enabled document, we'll say, let's drop that on disk. Does your AV catch it, or your EDR, does it catch it? No. All right, we're going to double click and open it. Does it catch it now? No. All right, now we're going to have the user say, yes, run the macro. Does it still catch it? No. And actually we see on our C2 server that that's calling back and everything's working correctly, right? And we do this right in front of the clients. Like, they get to see us drop the macro on disk. They get to see us double click it and click through all the prompts and see the callback happen. So it's a big thing for us, and a lot of the reactions are like, wait, what? That's how it works. And we'll have our C2 server up, right? So we use a variety of products, but like in 2021 we were using Cobalt Strike a lot. So we'll have the Cobalt Strike team server up and we'll say, this is what it looks like for us, right? Like, this is the stuff we have access to. And then we go on from there, right? The next test case might be see if we can elevate to admin. So we'll try to elevate to admin. If we can't, we'll say, all right, let's just pretend we could. Let's elevate ourselves to admin. They just admin us for us, right? And now we're going to say we're going to run Mimikatz. If we run Mimikatz and we're dumping logon passwords, here's what it looks like. Like, this is your password, or this is this user account's password. And then we just keep working our way up from there. Like, we'll just, depending on each, we call them bundles or we call them indexes, right? Each set of tests is designed to test for something else. But like in some cases, we might try to become domain admin, right? In some cases, we're not trying to do anything like that. We're just testing the endpoint and only the endpoint. So we're just going to run like 1,000 different ways of, not 1,000, like 100 different ways of exploiting the endpoint, right? We'll be doing stuff over and over again. But yeah, it's always in front of them. Like, if it's a Zoom call, there's a screen share where they're seeing what's happening.
So is it like a tabletop exercise, like backdoors and breaches on like steroids type of thing, or?
Yeah, and I hesitate to call it a tabletop exercise because tabletop like also has so many other stuff. But yeah, it is very much like that, where we are actually running the stuff that we're running, but we're not doing it for the goal of doing something besides just seeing if the tool sets see it or not. Like, there's no flag that we've identified. There's no like there's no target that we're going after. We're specifically just saying what happens if this exploit runs on your machine.
Okay. So do the red and the I guess the blue teams, do they discuss, or is that the job of the purple team in your organization? Like,
So
is it?
That's a good question. So when we say purple team at SRA, and I think that's a good explaining point. When we say purple team at SRA, what we mean is that there's typically a red and a blue person there from SRA, and then of course there's usually the defensive folks from the organization, the client organization, right? Like they have analysts, they have engineers, and then the only true, I'm going to call it a purple role that we have, is the person that we at SRA call the MC, but they're basically a coordinator, right? Their job is to coordinate between the blue and the red team. The finding out what happened, that's the responsibility of the blue team with the assistance of the purple team and the red team folks. So for instance, I'll go back to Kerberos thing, right? So we do Kerberos thing. Now, if that's not detected whatsoever, right? Like no alert fired, there's no one in CERT saying, hey, someone's Kerberosing us, right? The job of our blue team person and the blue team people of the organization is to say, okay, cool. A Kerberos thing is, and I'm not going to give away anything because this is your homework assignment. A Kerberos thing is these event IDs, right? Let's go find these event IDs in your sim or in whatever tool set these event IDs are going into, right? And a Kerberos is these event IDs with this particular pattern. And the goal is for people for our team to give our knowledge of what Kerberosing is to that team, but then to work in tandem to say, now how can we actually make that alert fire when these events happen in this pattern?
That's pretty cool. Like I'm not sure what I thought purple teaming was, but like I feel like it wasn't that.
Oh,
So
and to be fair, and let me take a step. Different consulting places do purple teaming differently. So there are places that do purple teaming a lot more like a
that's
tabletop,
pretty cool. Like I'm not
right?
sure what I thought.
There's also other places that do purple teaming in a lot more of like a capture the flag kind of scenario, right? And we just picked this method one because back when purple teaming was first happening, so this is that 20, maybe 17, 16, 17. Nobody knew what purple teaming was. And so our interpretation of that is we need the defensive side to have as much understanding of the attack as possible, right? Like the biggest thing we saw was that there was a gap between the hackers and the hackies, if you will, right? Like the hackers are like, yep, this is what Mimikatz does, and it reads LSAS this way, and it does this, and this is how it works, right? And the blue team, they were mostly like, LSAS is a process that needs to be protected, right? The two sides didn't understand what the other side was doing. And so there was a gap there, and that's what we identified as the gap that we wanted to fill, and that's the way we started doing purple teaming, which was expose the blue team to what the red team is actually doing, and vice versa, expose the red team to how the blue team defends against stuff. And so we've actually found that our red team has improved a little bit because they'll be like, oh, that's how you defend against it? Very good. And now I'm going to figure out how to bypass that. And that's true for the blue team as well. They're like, oh, that's how that attack works? Okay, now I'm going to figure out how to defend against it.
I actually tell folks, when they're interested in being red teams, that I always try to use a basketball analogy, right? You build a better offense by making sure that you understand what to do in the various defensive positions, and you build a better defense by knowing different offenses that can be presented to you. So in order for you to be a good red teamer, you have to know what it is that people are going to do to try to prevent you from doing what you're doing, in the same for the blue team. So I think it's important that both the red teamers and the blue teamers at least have an idea of what the other is doing. And it looks like that you guys kind of address that problem by saying, hey, we're going to put people kind of like in the middle here that are good at both the red and the blue team, but I guess with the eye towards making sure that you're building better defenses for the blue teams for your clients, right? So it's not like you guys are actually doing this, I guess, in-house for your company. You're doing this actually for your clients to help them build better defenses to protect their systems.
Yeah, absolutely. And to take your analogy, right? Like this basically is like, instead of the game, right? Like when you have like little like when you play. Oh, everything okay?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
I can't hear you.
Can you hear me okay? Can
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you. Can you hear me all
Okay,
right?
good. Yeah, I can hear you now. Sorry, my
Okay.
speaker decided to pick up and start broadcasting throughout the room.
Oh, sorry about. Yeah, so when we do I forgot the call. What were we talking? Oh
We
yeah,
were talking
no.
about
So
analogies.
yeah. So to take your analogy, right? Like this is sort of like a practice game, right? The idea is that in real life, you're not going to get to know how the attacker is going to operate, right? But in this case, it's sort of you have a red team and a blue team sitting together, but you're all actually on the same team, right? You're not actually the red team isn't actually trying to get anything. They're literally there to make your defenses better, right? And they're there showing you their entire playbook so that you get a deeper understanding of what the attackers could or would do. And so the goal is for you to use this opportunity as a practice game, right? Because the next time it happens when an attacker is there, you're not necessarily going to know how to react or what to do.
So if you know the plays in advance, right? You know, like, hey, they're going to do like a man on man versus a zone
Yeah,
defense, right? Like if you
yeah,
know in advance, right? I feel like as a blue teamer, you should know what to look for, right? Like
you should,
how
yeah.
is there an
So
element of surprise if there's I know you have to agree upon the scope and what's
yeah,
what are the rules of engagement, right? But like
so
what plays are coming.
so that's a good question. The thing here is that because we're running the real attacks, if they decide to engineer a defense ahead of the test, I'm all for that. Like so if I'm gonna run curb roasting and I've told you I'm gonna run curb roasting tomorrow, and you're like, okay, I don't want to get caught without having a curb roasting defense. I'm gonna write a curb roasting defense and put it into production for tomorrow, right? You've actually just improved the security of your organization. Good job. Like that's it, right? The thing we do and the way we deal with situations where they're like, oh no, actually we would have caught that, is we have a really strict standard of what the outcome of any particular attack is, right? So when we run an attack, what we say is you can fall in, your outcome can be in one of a few buckets, right? You could have blocked our attack, right? Completely outright. Curb roasting, that's a little difficult to do, so we can sort of ignore that, right? The next thing you could have done is you could have alerted on it, and this is where this falls into. When we say alerted, what we mean, and this is something that we are very strict about, right? What we mean is that someone would get this alert, right, that curb roasting happened, and they have a defined IRW that they would follow to actually remediate the alert. So if you have an alert that fires that goes to a queue that no one reads, that's not an alert. If you
So it's
have right, yeah. So we call it. It has to be in production, or there has to be an IRW, like some process has to be followed if this alert is actually fired.
it's not just enough that it could like gets picked up or logged like somewhere. It
Yeah,
has to be that a person has to take action
there has to be an
based on.
actionable event. Yep. So like if you today were like, I'm gonna write a curb roasting alert, but if you're not getting it in prod and there's no IRW, right, that alert just fires and it goes to your email, right? That's not gonna matter. Like we might give you credit that you've logged the information, and we might even throw a note in there that there's an engineer that's written a development alert that did actually catch the activity, so it just needs to be moved into production. Like we might classify it as something that you could quickly get a defensive capability on, but if there's no active analyst that would receive that alert and respond to it, then there's nothing there. And I do see a question there. What's an IRW? An IRW is apologies for using the acronym there like that, is incident response workflow. It's you might hear it as playbook or something. It's basically a set of actions a defensive or an analyst would take given an alert or an incident that happened. So, like an incident fires, they follow these steps to, if not resolve the incident, escalate the incident so it can be investigated further.
So it's not just enough that they have, gotten the thing, but they have to actually do something, and so that would, at that point, they won't be able to say, like, hey, oh, we would have caught this. Like, if it's not like something that's well defined, so that we can see, that the response to it, then it's
They don't
not.
get credit for it. Yep.
So is this the same as like, or I guess, what's the relationship between this and a penetration test? So if somebody comes to SRA and says like, hey, I want a purple team assessment, or what does that look like in terms of like,
What the
compliance
difference is?
type
Yeah.
requirements?
So a penetration test is designed to find any weakness. So when a client asks for a pen test at SRA, obviously we scope it, we do what we have to, right? And at that point, we typically say we're not necessarily trying to find every possible weakness you have, but we're trying to identify configuration or misconfigurations that allow us escalation of privilege through your environment, right? Be it like old school LM&R, be it like you have web services that are running as admin, right? That kind of thing, and we're gonna go from no privilege to as much privilege as possible, and that's not to say, and every organization does pen testing a little bit differently, and it's not like we'll find one path and just stop there. But our goal when we do a pen test is to get as much privilege as possible. So we're not trying to identify every possible way we can escalate privilege. We're trying to say how can I get to domain admin, and how quickly can I get there? And once I'm there, how can I exploit the access that I have? Whereas when you look at purple teaming, the goal there is more to say how can I actually what is my attack surface, and how can I reduce that as much as possible? So typically we classify pen testing as like a protect kind of thing. So if you're familiar with the NIST framework, we'll say in a pen test, if they fire an alert off activity that we're doing, we want them to tell us, and we'll say, cool, we'll record that we had the alert, but we're going to keep going, right? But if you blocked us, now we're blocked, there's nothing we can actually do. You typically get more credit in purple teams when you're generating alerts, because then you would actually perform the IRW, right? In a pen test scenario, we'd say, cool, you fired the alert, you told us, please don't do the IRW, we're going to keep going like we're going. And then one small thing I'll add here is we have another thing that we call adaptive red teams, another service that we call red teams or adaptive red teams. Those are a little bit more different than pen tests in that they have the only thing we define there is rules of engagement and flags. And at that point, red and blue teams both just go for it, right? Like the blue team typically isn't even told this is going to happen, and the red team is basically just told, here are the flags, do whatever you have to do to get to those flags. I mean, within reason, obviously, don't tear down the entire network, but like do whatever you have to do to get to those flags as long as you stay in scope. So in that case, like if the blue team catches something, they're supposed to follow their IRW, right? They're not supposed to just give the pen testers a heads up. They follow the IRW and they chase it down, and they should trigger an incident if needed. So like this is the massive spectrum of it. If you think about it from that perspective, the adaptive red teams are designed to test you from an actual response capability. And the purple teams are all the way on the other side, which are designed to actually evaluate your tool set capacity and your ability to respond. And pen tests sort of fall in the middle of that.
So we tend to think about purple teams as an in-house type of capability or offering, right? A lot of folks do pen testing because they have some kind of regulatory requirement for it, either because of the sector they're in, the industry, whatever the case may be, right? So who is looking for purple team services, right? Because when you're taught about what purple team is, like I said, it's typically thought about as something that you do in-house to improve your own, but it sounds like you guys are offering like purple teaming as a service for other companies who want to strengthen their security postures. Does that sound about right?
That's exactly right. So we have two big sets of customers, right? One is so we have a CSOC service that we offer as part of SRA, right? And our own we do our own purple teams as for our purple team clients, right? As a way for us to improve their defenses that we're managing, right? And that sort of follows that in-house model that you were talking about. The other side of it, where we do this as an advisory service, there's a pretty wide swath of reasons of why clients want to do this. The first and the biggest one is that they just don't have the capacity to do this in-house. So there's quite a few companies that just don't have the wherewithal or the knowledge base to say, I want to run these tests, or I want to run this attack, right? The other, more specifically though, because there's always someone who could run a test, right? Like running Mimikatz, there's someone in your security team who could do that for you, right? The thing is more, they don't have the capacity to say what test should we be running, and the thing we provide to them is a sort of rubric of saying, for your organization or your industry, these are the best tests to run. And as you improve in this space, here's the next set of tests you run. So like a quick example is that we have what we call our essentials index, which is just like what we consider what every organization should be able to defend against. Then we do like specific threat emulation, so like a financial services threat emulation or a life science index threat emulation, where we emulate the actors in those verticals. And then we have things like ransomware emulation. We do things like, and we also do things like our sort of similar to ransomware, but like our destructive malware, kind of like, the more aggressive form of ransomware, if you will, right, where we tie in the components of like DLP, where people are exfilling and ransomwaring stuff. And then we have just larger bundles, right, where we, instead of just doing 50 to 80 test cases, we'll do 100 or 200 test cases for people. These kinds of things, that's where we found organizations need the most help, where they say, yeah, we have someone who knows how to run the red team stuff, but what is the right team thing to do? Because like a lot of times people look at MITRE, and MITRE's like everything, right? Like MITRE's like some 200 techniques. There's just like so many individual procedures under those techniques. Like it's just too much to think about. So we give people hey, here's what we've seen in the industry. Here's what we're using, like in some of our stuff. Like here's what our red team actually does, right? Or here's what Wizard Spider actually does, and now we can map that so you can actually see what that looks like. So we give them that rubric that they can follow.
So I feel like these organizations would have to be very self-aware in order to know that they need you, right? Because they would have to be able to assess their risk and figure out where they're kind of lacking as far as resources and capabilities to even know, that they need you, for example.
Yeah, I think over COVID and the number of attacks that happened over COVID to so many organizations has brought a lot of self-awareness on corporations. Places that have not previously ever thought they'd need something like this, all of a sudden are like, wait, actually, you know what? We should probably do this, right? The other thing we found, and bear in mind, I am not a regulatory person, so like take like a whole gallon of salt when you say this, but I think in some scenarios, purple teams have been allowed to replace pen tests. So if you run a purple team, you can meet the compliance requirement that you've done a pen test. Bear in mind, I am not a regulator. This is like the I am not a lawyer disclaimer here, but I think that that's a thing that happened. The other thing is also, we've seen in a lot of cases that security teams themselves, they may not say that we have to think about this from a risk-based approach, but they'll say something like, we have a whole team of engineers that just don't know what to do, right? Like not from I don't know how to fix a problem, but like they don't know how to find the problems to fix, right? Like they're like, oh, like we have a whole bunch of smart people who like are like all revved up, ready to go, but they just need a direction to go, right? They need a path to follow, like a plan that they can use. And that's kind of where purple teams has fit for them, because we don't really have to do anything for them on the blue team side, but we just give them the rubric of here's the attack, here's the time, and they'll go themselves and find. And we have quite a few organizations that do that. They just say, hey, come and run these tests for us, and then come again in a quarter and run them again, and we'll just see how well we've done. We don't want you to do anything in between. Just give us the path to get there, right? And we have the people who can do that.
Yeah, it actually, now that you say it, it actually makes sense that it would, in some cases take the place of a pen test, just because you have the ability to define the scope and, say, what the rules of engagement are, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I guess, behind the curtains, it may not look very much different than, something that's, explicitly defined to be a red team, penetration test type of
Yeah.
exercise. So I guess that makes a lot of sense. So how did you get into this space? Obviously, you didn't go to school to become a purple teamer. What's
Yeah.
your educational background? Like, how did you get here?
So,
I mean,
I went to Drexel University. I went to their information technology program. I think it was called IT, right? It was a bachelor's in IT. Very similar track to Garrett, who you guys had on a little while ago. Um, and the first job I had out of college though was a very like old school security shop, right? It was very much like have a very in-depth knowledge of your problem space, and that's the way you can solve it. So like I came out like when I joined before joining SRA, when I was at this company, it was very much like, hey, do you know what the packets themselves are doing, right? Like I remember one of my questions during the interview was like, walk me through the TCP handshake, right? Because like that's the level of granularity they got into, and like what was the other thing? Like when we were talking about, oh yeah, like walk me through like how does a library get loaded by an executable, and how does like dropping a library in the same directory as an executable, like why does that affect it, right? So super in-depth questions, and wanted to make sure you really understood the depth of security, right? And I came out of that and joined SRA, and I joined the white box team, like I told you, right? Doing
mhm.
security assessments and those kinds of things like code review. um, I ended up in purple teams because I kind of felt this space of how like is the thing we're doing matter? Like does the thing we do matter, right? Like one thing I really liked about the white box team is that when we'd go in there and we'd assess a service, for instance, right? We'd make really targeted recommendations, and we'd go in there and help them develop the actual defensive the responses to those recommendations, right? Like if I found that someone had like a use after free issue, right? I'd go into the code there with the guy and be like, okay, let's see how we can fix this problem and how can we do this, et cetera, right? And I like the fact that when we came back again to do the assessment later, like those problems were fixed. When I went to pen testing, that just wasn't happening. And I think the industry kind of felt that as a whole, right? Like where you do a pen test, you come back a year later, and you could almost take the old report and just go, all right, let's start here and work our way down, and like maybe if something was more critical, right? Like the domain admin like chats his password to everyone in the company, right? Like that was stopped, right? But the next item wasn't. um, and that's why I kind of moved into the blue space, because I said I want to work in the area that we're actually like engineering
Making
defensive,
changing.
yeah, like actually fixing the problems that are happening. um, and I think within a year of me being there, this purple teaming thing was starting to pick up. And when I was talking to my boss about this, he was like, hey, this is a thing that's happening a lot. And that's when I got into purple teams, and I was like, this is an interesting space for us to be in, because of all of a sudden it wasn't just I'm running Kerberoasting and now it's your problem to figure out. It's I ran Kerberoasting. Here's the event IDs I generated. Here's the pattern I did. Let's write a rule, right? Like you're using, this is when we started Splunk was like the big thing back then, right? So it was, all right, you have Splunk. Here's a template Splunk rule we have. Let's start there and let's work our way forward to actually detecting Kerberoasting at a regular basis. And so that's kind of what drew me into it. And then like I was saying, SRA kind of moved this way as well, right? Like we just saw that there's this huge need of people having a way to defend, right? Some organizations are mature enough. They just need the attack run and they'll write the defense. Some people need a little bit more help, and we're happy to provide that help. But that's how I moved into this, and it kind of like mirrors SRA's journey into it, because we saw that as a space where organizations were lacking, that they don't know, they want to fix it, they just don't know how.
Hmm. Yeah, I think just operating in this space, I see that a lot of times if it's marked, critical or high, then they may or may not do something about it year to year, right?
Yeah,
But if it's not, like if it's medium, like they really don't have any, I guess driver to resolve those issues. So they
yeah.
might be there, year after year. So I that makes sense to me. So what about certifications? Have you had to do you
Okay,
have any
so
certifications
I
like
have I don't
DEA to do what
you So on paper, you don't. I am very anti-certification, but that's partly because I got lucky. Because so Drexel has a co-op program, right? So they just accept people like you. You intern for 6 months basically while you're in school. So you work full time 6 months, and then you go to classes the other 6 months essentially. So I managed to get that experience without certifications, and got my foot in the door that way. So I co-op at the company Susquehanna International Group for 2 years, and then companied at SRA, co-opted at SRA for a year. So like that let me bypass the certifications. There are purple team certifications that are out there. I think the biggest thing, like when you're thinking about this from a cert perspective, though, is getting good at one of the sides, right? So getting a certification in like the sim of your choice, like getting good at like develop or the EDR platform of your choice, understanding that platform deeply will give you a better advantage when you're dealing with attacks, purple team or otherwise, because you'll know how to respond to them. Or if you want to be on the red side, that's the side you like. Any of the certs out there are pretty good. I haven't taken any, so I can't say that any of them are good. But like the ones that the what's the big one that it used to be? I
The
don't even.
OSCP or
Yeah, the OSCP. Yeah, so like that kind of certification is a good one to have. Like it gives you a good base of knowledge, and of course you'll have to like tweak your skills on the area you're interested in. Like Windows is a big thing these days. If that's your thing, like you'll have to tweak the certs that you get for that. If web apps is your thing, like obviously tweak accordingly. Um, but I didn't do any certs. I don't think you need any certs to do what I do. But certs do give you a good like same way, it gives you a good rubric of what to learn, and it helps you specialize in one area or another.
okay. So you mentioned you got lucky, right? But what I'm hearing is that you got your bachelor's degree and you were able to make it to the head of purple teaming at a consulting company without any certifications or without any additional like outside things, right? So how can
Yeah,
somebody kind of replicate this success, right? Regardless of if you think it's lucky or not, right? It's
yeah,
obviously possible. um
yeah,
what can somebody do if they wanted to not go back to school for like a master's or not get a whole bunch of
yeah.
certifications?
So, oh, sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to
No, I
cut
was
you
just
off.
going to say because I haven't actually heard of any co-ops as a thing, right? When
Yeah,
people generally talk about things these days, it'll be like, hey, I'm doing a boot camp, or hey, I'm doing an apprenticeship or an internship.
yeah.
So what does that look like today? Is that, can somebody replicate your success?
Um, I think so. So when I say lucky, I do really mean that, and the highlight I want to make there is sometimes it's just that, and I don't mean to say I didn't work hard, and I don't want to say that like if you don't get lucky, there's just a certain amount of someone taking a chance on you. So for me, it was at SIG. It was a really difficult interview. I will tell you that I technically did not pass the interview. Um, what basically happened is that the security team passed on me. Another couple of teams said they wanted to take me on. um, but when the recruiter talked to me, I said security was the area I really wanted to go into. She talked to the manager of the team. The manager of the team said, "All right, if he's really interested, like let's just like." I don't think I failed hard. Although one of my best friends, he's one of the people who interviewed me. He insists to this day I did. But like I did well enough that they said, you know what, let's just give him a shot, right? And like that was a big moment for me. Um, but I think in order to replicate what I've done, the thing that I focused on is the thing I took out of my time at SIG, which was understand, and I sort of look at it like this, right? The world, like when you look at security, everything happens at layers of abstraction, right? Like you don't want to understand the assembly level code, right? So you go up a couple levels of abstraction, you're going to work in Python. The thing I've tried to tell people is how I got to where I got to was I always went 2 layers of abstraction below where you need to go, right? Like, so don't just understand Kerberos is this. Like, really go into it and say, how does Kerberos work? Okay, now that I understand how Kerberos works, what is a Kerberos attack actually doing, right? And that forces you to also say, okay, how does AD work? Okay, now that I understand how AD works, how does it? So like learning all the components of how curb roasting work. And I did not mean for curb roasting to become like the example of the day, but it's a good one, I guess. But like understanding how all those components work made it so I really understood how the attack curb roasting work. And then the one level up is what is the impact that curb roasting can have, right? Like what curb roasting happened, great. Why is it bad, right? Why is it a bad thing that it happened? And what are the potential implications of it? Understanding that really helped me in security in general, but also helped me whenever I had to transition from role to role, because no matter what I was facing, I could always say, do I understand the components of it, right? Like if someone were to come to me and say, hey, by the way, there's curb roasting 2.0, it wasn't I have to learn how 2.0 works. It's okay, let me understand the steps of curb roasting, and I know how curb roast works, and I know how AD works. I just need to adjust my understanding of this new attack, right? Like it stopped becoming a thing where I had to relearn things over and over again. It was more just now that I understand these fundamental components, it makes it easier for me to create my own abstraction of that ideal. So when I went from SIG to SRA, it wasn't just, SIG was very much like a defensive kind of position. SRA, I was moving into an attacking kind of thing. It wasn't like I obviously had to learn all the attacking things, but like I didn't have to understand how a proxy worked, because while at SIG, they were like, here's how a proxy works, and you better understand it with every fiber of your being, right? Like, so now if someone told me, hey, you have to use burp to do something, I'd be like, cool. Oh, burp is just a weird kind of proxy. And for people who don't know, burp is like a web application testing proxy. Um, Great product. I get nothing from this, so like this isn't like I'm not trying to like make a sale here. Great product, but like if you have burp, I didn't need to understand how burp worked. Like I didn't have to waste my like I understood it. I understood the capabilities and features in it. Now I may not have been great at web application testing, and people at SRA will tell you I wasn't when I started. But like I didn't have to spend the extra mental energy understanding this whole new platform, right? It was I understood the technology that underlied everything, so I could move on a little further and faster. And I mean, everybody says this in technology, right? It's how quickly can you learn the next thing. What I've found in the time I've spent in security and technology in general is that there are a lot of changes that happen, but they're always built on these fundamental basic building blocks. So if you can understand, like to this day, I remember how the TCP handshake works. Knowing that and understanding that means that I understand how networking works really well, right? That means whether you give me a Docker container or Kubernetes or clustered something, right? I may not know the technologies, but I can say, all right, I understand how networking works. Packets have to get from point A to point B somehow. Let's figure out how it's going to happen, right? Like I don't need to understand everything, but I just need to make the connections happen. And I've been able to flexibly move from role to role because of that sort of ability to build that abstraction of myself.
So what is that foundations? What do those building blocks look like for somebody who would be interested in doing a career in purple team?
A career in purple teaming. So the biggest thing there is going to be, and I hate to harp on this, networking, right? Like not like human networking, like technology networking, like computer networking. Knowing how different things talk to each other is going to be the biggest part of understanding getting to the next step, right? Like if when you see an IP address and you see another one and you're like, I know what needs to happen for them to talk to each other, that makes your life a lot easier, because so much of what happens in the attack and defense space is how can I get something that happened over there over to the next place? And then from there, it's I struggle to say this. From there, it's understanding technologies iteratively. So pick a lane that you like. If it's AD or Windows, right? Go into Windows and learn both sides of it, right? Like understand. And I'm going to pick on Mimikatz here because I've done curb roasting too much. But when you think about using Mimikatz to dump the LSAS process, Don't just think, okay, if I run Mimikatz and I run this command line, I will get passwords, right? Understand how is the attack actually working? What is Mimikatz doing? Like that's the red side of it. And then from the blue side of it, think, what is the purpose of LSAS, right? Like why are these passwords stored in memory? Like there's like obviously idiots haven't made Windows, even though it may seem like that sometimes, right? It's clearly smart people have done this. Why is it that way? Right? And understanding those two sides of it start to move you towards how do I start figuring out how to defend against this process being attacked by Mimikatz or anything else.
Would you suggest that folks who are interested in doing purple team take a look at something like as massive as like the MITRE ATT&CK framework, as far as like, just having a playbook for like the types of attacks that can be done? Or do you suggest that they, as you said, go a couple layers, I guess, lower to try to figure that out?
So the biggest thing is I'd suggest people go in the direction that they feel like they would have the energy to keep going in, right? Like, so I don't want to say, get the Windows internals book and start reading that today, right? Like if low level software design and like operating system design is not your thing, you're going to get bored and discouraged and you'll move on, right? So find whatever you're passionate about, find it and do that, but just take the effort to go those 2 layers deep. So like if red team is your thing and you want to do purple teaming, a really good way to do purple teaming or getting ready for purple teams using red teams is, all right, let me identify a set, like using MITRE, right? Let me identify a series of attacks I want to run. There's a really cool project out there called Atomic Red Team, where they automate a lot of attacks, and it's based on MITRE. So go into that project, use MITRE, use Atomic Red Team to learn the types of attacks that are out there, and then go that 2 layers deep and understand what's 1 layer below this and what's 1 layer below that, and then go the 1 layer above, right? Like what's the impact of the attack that you've done. Purple teaming is more of a process, so it's difficult to say, here's how you get into purple teaming. A lot of times, and at SRA itself, right? A lot of our best purple teamers have actually come from both sides of the fence. We have a really, really strong purple teamer, and he is like one of the best red teamers that we have. And he sort of moved into the purple team space, and he does a lot of the attack stuff, and he does a lot of defensive stuff, right? But another very, very strong purple teamer is like well, like a Windows sysadmin who's done a lot of defensive engineering, so he knows how a lot of this stuff works. And when he comes into purple teams, he can bring that experience to bear. But the biggest thing is that both of these people are people who took the effort to go that 2 layers down to understand things, and that way they're able to respond to it during the purple team.
Do you guys at SRA hire like purple teamers like off the streets, or is it like people who are just excelling on either the red or the blue team from within?
So I'm not gonna lie, we don't typically hire, and I don't do a lot of hiring, so don't stand by this answer. We don't typically hire purple teamers directly. Just because I think the thing we found is that everyone does purple teaming differently. So, you might be a purple teamer at organization X, but when you come here, that experience might not be useful for you. But oftentimes what we'll do is our college hires and our new hires, right, we'll look for them to be in one of the 2 areas. Like, we want you to be a good red teamer, because only with that red teamer knowledge can you come into a purple team and provide to run the test cases and stuff. So like we typically, or same on the defensive side, right? Like if you're a good EDR person, right? Like Defender really well, you're going to be a resource we want to bring into on the purple team where the client has Defender, because you'll be able to help point us to things as we're going through the testing.
So you mentioned your college hires. One of the folks in the chat said that they were working on an associate's degree in cybersecurity, and the fields are so broad. How do you narrow down a field, for someone who doesn't like coding? So when you guys are looking at, your college folks, are you only looking for computer science people, or what other would be, I guess, something that was desirable for the role?
So we look at everything. Ultimately, the thing we're most interested in at SRA, and this is across all like red, blue, CSOC, everything, right? We look at people who like to solve problems using technology. So in some cases, that's programming, right? So we'll hire people who have a programming base. But in a lot of cases, it isn't, right? Like there's a lot of like um, if you like like architecture and engineering and like developing systems that solve problems, we want people like that. If you like you know investigating things that have gone wrong and you're like, okay, cool, like this was an attack, who ran the attack, what's the user, and like you're pivoting through data like that in sort of like a visual three-dimensional way, we want that kind of person as well. Programming tends to strengthen that creative problem solving mindset, so that's why oftentimes there's a preference for that. And on our red team side, I think we lean a little bit to having programming knowledge, because oftentimes we use like Python or Go or something else, right? Like Bash to like set up an
Automate.
attack, yeah, automate things that we're doing, that kind of stuff. But that's certainly true on the blue team side as well, right? Like one of our super proficient blue team folks, he's a really strong PowerShell developer, right? And is pretty good at .NET as well. So like, that's not to say you can't have programming, but we have plenty of people at SRA, and I've worked with plenty of people in the industry who aren't programming centric, but are very good at the things they're doing because it's just a different way of solving a problem.
So if nothing else, what I'm hearing is, figure out what your niche is and just be good at that thing, right?
Yeah,
Figure out
yeah.
what your, intersection, what are you trying to do? And then find somebody who needs those type of problems solved.
Exactly, and I realize that's a generic answer, and so I apologize for that. In an attempt to be a little bit more discreet, what I would say is become really good at the products that are out there, right? So like if programming is not your thing and you're not, like, that's not the area you want to go into, understanding how does a SIM work, how does an EDR product work, how do security mail gateways work, understanding these products at a really deep level will help you sort of get past that coding barrier, because now you'll be solving problems with that particular product. And I still want to highlight what I said below, right before, right? Go 2 layers below the product. So don't just think about the EDR blocking Mimikatz. It's not just that, right? Go again down a little deeper. Like, why is it, like, what does it mean to block Mimikatz? What was Mimikatz going after? Like, get that depth of knowledge so you're not like bound to one EDR product. You can move flexibly between them. So like, you don't want to be in a situation that McAfee really well, and now it's 2022 and very few people are using McAfee, right? So it's that, I think that mentality still applies, but that's an approach you can take if programming is not your thing.
So the question I ask everyone, you are currently at the top of your purple team, I guess, food chain at SRA. I think you're purple team manager, leading purple teams there. What does your role domination plan look like? What is next for you? What's the next level up?
That's a good question. Honestly, for me, the next level up is how can we make it there's two parts of this, right? How can we make it easier and more accessible for people to be able to take, like, get the red side of it, right? So some of this includes how can we make it so that these tests are more encapsulated and are run in a way that we can, we don't necessarily need to do a full assessment to do this, right? Like, how can we make it so that we can make this a more ongoing, continuous process, and think like CI/CD, right? Like, how can we do CI/CD for red team? And then the other side of it is, how do we better measure and mature in this space so that we are capturing the right outcomes, right? And I realize it's a bit boring, but a big part of this that we've learned in the past 3 or 4 years of doing purple teaming is that what like security people want to see is not necessarily the same thing that like executive leadership wants to see, right? And ultimately, executive leadership is the one that decides if we get the money to do the things we need to do, right? So how can we present them a real story, right? Like, I don't want to necessarily exaggerate the risk to an organization, right? But at the same time, I don't want to downplay the risk or present the risk in a way that it doesn't make sense to someone, right? So how can we make this stuff clearer to the leadership teams that are out there that this is the risk that it faces your organization faces, and these are the actions and steps, and ultimately this is the funding we need to be able to respond to those threats. I think being able to do that gets us better. Like as people in security, we've now gotten into the executive level, right? People know what to do. Like they now accept security people at the executive level. We just have to improve our ability to communicate at that level and drive the outcomes we need forward in a way that they understand and in a way that makes sense for the organization.
Yeah, I definitely think that the folks need to understand the business impact. And I tell people all the time, like, if you want to actually say the things that you're finding get resolved year after year, you have to make the business case as to why they need to resolve it.
Yeah.
So your world domination plan, like what is the top for you?
I think like this is the lamest thing ever. I can't believe I'm saying this. I think it is that how do we get better business understanding of the problems in the security world, right? So like being able to so part of this is the product at SRA Vector that we use, right? How do we use that product to get these numbers directly in people's faces? So improve this product, make it something that we can expand and sell. But how do we make purple teams and security metrics sort of a thing that everyone understands, right? At the board level, everyone understands like accounting terms and they understand like production terms. I want security terms to be like that, right? I want like for people in the executive and boardroom level to understand security in the same breath that they understand accounting or they understand production or whatever it is, and
So is
be
that
able to
so is that a CISO or what does that look like?
I think it's kind of like a CISO. I don't think I'd ever want to be a CISO because I don't know that I could handle the like if I can't open a terminal once a day, I like break down. But yeah, like I don't know that I want to necessarily go to a CISO level directly, but I want to be able to give CISOs the tools they need to do that. Like I don't envision myself leaving consulting necessarily anytime soon, but I want to be giving the CISOs the tools they need so that they can do their jobs well, right? Like make that work for them.
Okay, that sounds like a plan. All right, well, we are coming up upon the end of our hour. Does anybody have any questions for our guest on YouTube or here in Zoom? All right, I don't see anything. So, Prateek, I thank you for hanging out with us today. I thank you for rescheduling. I know we've been playing this game for so many months now,
I
trying to
know,
get you scheduled.
most of this year, yeah.
I'm grateful that you were able to get out and hang out with us. And I thank you for hanging out with us today. So, everybody, enjoy the rest of your day, and we appreciate the great conversation.
Absolutely, and thank you so much for having me on.